Okay, well, good morning. Mr. Potato Head was, God, that was one of my favorite toys as a kid. I don't know why. Probably because I knew I was going to be bald when I grew older and would have to figure out how to doctor that. But yeah, that's great. This makes this day all the more important. Uh, but still not as important as Joy's birthday. So today we're going to look at Japan, and I just want to start by um, explaining the titles. We talked about how we stop being nomadic, we become fixed on a spot, sedentary. People are out of food, they attack, people won't give them food, you have fights, warfare, and out of it all, whoever wins the fight then becomes the leader. And over a very long period of time, the leader grows up to become more of an emperor and is leading a large protective force to defend against further attack of starving people wanting to get their food. They um, and what happens is time goes on and they take over more and more competing emperors. They fight and destroy one, and then they take the uh, the goods of the those who were vanquished, and the empire grows bigger. And over time, when the ruler, the emperor, has been around and people ask, why is that guy got so much? They then claim a special connection with God. And so they become somewhat of a deity. And the Queen of England, the King of England would say to the Prime Minister, I get my authority from God, you get your authority from the electorate. And so there's just a hierarchy of how it works. And the military people will be generals and that kind of thing to lead the protective edifice. Japan is very similar. Their emperor is connected as a deity really from the beginning of when they emerge as emperors. The emperor, well, let me just get this so I have the right page here. The emperor eventually becomes a deity and forms a dynasty. The dynasty is when that special blessing from God gets passed on to the next generation of the emperor. Um, and the and then it goes on for subsequent generations. So the emperor is there for eternity, if you will, through the different generations. The emperor in the dynasty rules over monarchs who are spread throughout the country. We would think of the monarchy as the king, as in the King of England. Um, but the leader of the military is the shogun. So when you read about Japanese history and they'll talk about a period of this shogun leader or such and such dynasty, it's kind of important to understand really what their roles are. So let's start by taking a look at Japanese history.
Japan, the land of the rising sun. A nation renowned for its technologically advanced cities, traditional cultural offerings, and immense natural wonders, which together make for one of the most sought-after tourist destinations in the world, attracting millions of visitors each year. Surprisingly, however, this level of openness to outsiders is a relatively recent phenomenon in the nation's history. In fact, for well over 200 years, from the 17th to 19th centuries, Japan's borders were firmly closed to any outside visitors whatsoever. This time period, known as Sakoku, bore witness to a flourishing of Japanese culture, rapid economic growth, and dynamic societal developments, which up until that point had never been seen before. As a result, this gifted the nation with many of the iconic cultural treasures whose legacies have survived to this day. But how did this island nation undergo such a dramatic transition from a period of relative isolation into becoming one of the most developed and open countries in the world today? This is the history of Japan. The archipelago of islands that make up the modern nation of Japan have been inhabited for the best part of 40,000 years, with the first human settlers migrating there from mainland Asia. These early inhabitants brought skills such as agriculture and metalworking with them, which laid the groundwork for the establishment of permanent settlements and eventually the earliest kingdoms. By the 3rd century AD, a significant portion of southern Japan had coalesced into a centralized power structure based around the Yamato region, which was ruled under a system headed by a monarch known as the emperor. Much of Japan's early history would be shaped and influenced by cultures from the Asian mainland, with Buddhism being introduced to the region in the year 552 from Korea, and later in 645, a series of reforms known as the Taika reforms being implemented to remodel the political landscape of the country and mirror the Chinese system based around an imperial court.
Now, they mention that period of time of 250 years of isolation. Again, if we go deep into history, understand that through our long lineage of 7 million years of different species stemming from the ape family, people were all over. So like we have China, we have Korea, we have Japan, we have all these different places that now have a name and have a country. But there was a period of time that there was no name, there were no boundaries. You weren't Japanese, you weren't Chinese, you were just people. And over time, cultures emerge and differences are established. But I just think it's very important to understand that there's not a biological marker that says you are Japanese or Chinese. Let's look at that period of isolation, which is led by the shogun with blessings from the emperor, where Japan remains isolationist for over 200 years.
All those who are in contact with us are bound by an oath and signed with their blood not to talk or entrust to us information about the situation of their country, their religion, and secrets of government.
So reported the German doctor Engelbert Kempfer, one of the few Europeans allowed in Japan. It was the year 1690, and the Japanese viewed Westerners as barbarians who threatened their orderly society. The Japanese were determined to keep their doors closed to the West for as long as they could. There was one exception, a small settlement of Dutch traders who agreed to live in confinement on an island in Nagasaki harbor. For over 200 years, this sequestered trading post would be Europe's only window to this impenetrable land. The Dutch East Indies Company sent Dr. Kempfer to provide medical care for the Dutch community. He was also asked to gather information about the everyday life of the Japanese. It would not be an easy task.
We are strictly and strongly guarded from the inside and the outside by various guards treating us not like honest men, but like criminals, traitors, spies, prisoners, or to say the least, hostages of the shogun. This jail goes by the name of Dejima.
The Dutch lived like prisoners on Dejima. But Kempfer was fascinated by the opportunity to write about something nobody else could get access to.
Dejima was tiny. Kempfer counted 236 steps across and 82 wide. There were never more than 19 men allowed on the island at a time, and never any Western women. Far from home, the men did what they could to transform the unfamiliar Japanese-style buildings into a little touch of Holland. They placed chairs and high tables on the woven grass mats, replaced futons with poster beds, and insisted on being served Dutch food rather than eating Japanese. No Japanese, except for prostitutes, were allowed unsupervised contact with the Dutch. Yet, in order to gather information for his reports, Kempfer managed to create a small group of inadvertent Japanese informants.
I served them willingly and without charge.
And so that became the beginning of spying, where the number one technique of gaining information is sex. And if that doesn't work, try sex again. The information that is derived by the Dutch attracts attention, just as the world's cotton bonanza was gaining steam. Japan is a natural port.
Japan's period of isolation would come to an abrupt end in 1853, when a fleet of American warships led by Commodore Matthew Perry arrived in Edo Bay. The US government wished to open Japan's ports to international trade, and was prepared to use military force to secure this goal if necessary. Being unable to match the superior firepower of the US forces, the shogunate reluctantly agreed to Perry's demands and opened up the country to American commercial interests, later extending this policy to other Western powers, such as Britain and Russia. This seeming capitulation to the Western powers angered many within Japan, particularly those from the southern provinces of Choshu and Satsuma. They quickly formed an alliance and, in 1868, convinced the young Emperor Meiji to issue a decree calling for an end to the Tokugawa shogunate. The armies of Choshu and Satsuma then marched on Edo, leading to the Boshin War and ultimately the downfall of the shogunate. The emperor subsequently regained supreme power over the country, marking a significant shift in Japan's governance. In 1869, the imperial court relocated to Edo, which was renamed Tokyo, and formally signaled the start of the Meiji Restoration. This would witness Japan embark on a new journey towards modernization, aiming to become a fully fledged nation-state on par with the Western powers. Under the Meiji government, priority was given to modernizing infrastructure, with the introduction of railways, telegraph lines, as well as a universal education system, and lifting the ban on Christianity. The government also enlisted the expertise of hundreds of advisors from Western nations, who shared their knowledge in various fields, such as mining, banking, law, and transportation, to help further Japan's modernization efforts. One particular area of focus was on the military, which underwent a significant adoption of the latest Western tactics and technologies. In 1877, this updated army was deployed to quell the Satsuma Rebellion, which had broken out due to the grievances of local samurai who had seen their roles as the nation's traditional fighting force become obsolete in the face of a modern standing army. Japan's new military might was also put to use in expanding the nation's territory overseas, in an attempt to replicate the colonial possessions of many of the Western powers of the time. After securing control over Hokkaido and annexing the Ryukyu Islands, Japan turned its attention towards China and Korea. In the First Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1895, Japan's highly motivated and well-led forces achieved a stunning victory over the larger military of Qing China, successfully annexing Taiwan as a result. In 1902, Japan signed a significant military alliance with Britain in order to counter the rising threat posed by Russian expansion in the region. The inevitable clash with Russia ultimately came at the Battle of the Yalu River, which marked the first time in decades that an Asian power had defeated a Western one. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905 culminated in the dramatic Battle of Tsushima, in which Japan's newly built navy virtually annihilated their Russian opponents. These military successes allowed Japan to assert its dominance further across the region by annexing Korea in 1910, thereby positioning itself not just as a regional power, but now as the predominant Asian power on the world stage. Motivated by these recent military triumphs.
And so, as Japan is now becoming westernized and is wanting to emulate more of America, who opened them up. That's, I think that's a great term. What did we do? We opened them up. And get this one up right. And so the Japan would never be the same again. They were humiliated, and eventually they assert their for redemption the attack upon Pearl Harbor, and so what had become known as the unfair treaties were the agreements that were forced upon the Japanese by the Commodore Perry confrontation. And what the Japanese really didn't know what they were getting into, but they didn't have any choices. They had, weaponry from centuries before, and they're looking at gunboats that can blow them out of the water. So what it gave is Westerners had unilateral privileges, especially immunity from legal action in Asian courts. And trade regimes were set up that denied local governments control over customs policy. So it says, we're going to use your natural harbors for our transportation of goods, and we're going to do it on our terms, and you have no say in the matter. Mind you, this also gets foisted upon the Koreans and others as time goes on, because the European powers, who are elbowing each other out of the way in the scramble for Africa, they're also looking at Asia, and they see that America gets these deals from the Japanese, so they all want in on the action. And so, they have to sign these unfair treaties with Britain and with France. So for Japan, the introduction of Western ways became something of a catastrophe at that time. And so what they wind up doing is they become westernized. Then we get the tensions that emerged from the scramble for Africa erupt into World War I. Japan, who had been isolationist, didn't want to be involved in any of that stuff, now is different. and Japan enters the war on the side of the Allies.
Motivated by these recent military triumphs and further aspirations to expand across the Asia-Pacific region, Japan joined the Allies in the First World War, with the aim of acquiring new colonies in the South Pacific that were nominally under German control. Following the conclusion of the war, Japan participated in the Treaty of Versailles and enjoyed favorable international relations, which were bolstered by its membership to the League of Nations. However, like many other countries during the post-war period, a growing nationalist and fascist-inspired sentiment began to take hold within Japanese society, particularly within the military, whose expansionist ambitions were becoming increasingly bolder. These aspirations triggered the outbreak of the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937, which saw further territorial acquisitions on the Chinese mainland and a growing distrust of Japan's intentions in the region by the international community. Alarmed by this aggression and increasing levels of expansion, the United States imposed harsh economic sanctions on Japan to hinder any further war effort. With the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, Japan realized that it needed to realign itself geopolitically with other nations who shared similar expansionist views, and consequently forged an alliance with Germany and Italy in 1940, which further worsened its relations with the US. Japan also alienated other Western powers, such as Britain, the Netherlands, and France, by occupying further territory in Southeast Asia and encroaching upon the colonial possessions of the European powers.
Yeah, I told you.
So much whiter.
Yeah, I know.
It's crazy.
There's really no excuse anymore to have yellow teeth.
Ultimately, however, Japan's government, under the leadership of Prime Minister and General Hideki Tojo, decided that it would need to preemptively strike against the United States if it was to lift the economic sanctions imposed upon it and secure the recent territorial acquisitions it had made in the Pacific. On the 7th of December 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched a surprise attack on the American fleet stationed at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. This assault prompted the United States to enter World War II on the side of the Allies and begin military operations against the Empire of Japan, which had by now conquered other territories in Asia, including the Philippines, Malaya, Hong Kong, Singapore, Burma, and the Dutch East Indies. The Allies, spearheaded by the United States, engaged in a fierce and prolonged conflict across the Pacific against Japanese forces. One of the key objectives was to secure small islands with strategically placed airfields that could be used for launching bombing raids on the Japanese mainland. However, the increasingly costly and slow progress of the fighting led the United States to realize that a ground invasion of Japan itself would result in incalculable losses for their troops. As a result, they decided to utilize a newly developed secret weapon to compel Japan to surrender. On the 6th and 9th of August 1945, the US dropped 2 atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, causing the deaths of well over 100,000 people.
What I want to suggest is that if you follow the dominoes and how we get to this point, Japan, isolationist, not bothering anybody, suddenly has to change because America wants ports to move product in the Industrial Revolution. There's also other things that motivated America, whale oil and stuff like that, but the primary reason really was for logistics. And Japan is frightened by the big black gunships that Commodore Perry rolls in with, and they succumb to treaties that are really, there's nothing in their interest in those treaties, but they go with it anyway, and they're humiliated. And that humiliation is a driving force when they come to a point where they're going to engage in the wars, they there is a spark of nationalism, which is copying what's gone on in Germany, what's gone on in Italy. They are following suit. They're becoming westernized. Same with Germany. So this nationalism becomes a driving force. But as Japan is preparing to go to war against America, its analysts, its military analysts, are saying this is going to be suicidal. We can't fight a war against America. They look at simply armaments. Do we have the capacity to actually fight this? And the answer is no. But yet they continue anyway, and they do because they're driven by the humiliation in 1953, 1958. And so they are, they have to keep going. It's the only way to redeem their manhood. And they go about it with a viciousness. The younger population, the younger military people, are the ones who are pushing for war. They, and it's really at a bridge by Nagasaki where they force a fight with the Chinese, and you then have a massive attack against the Chinese and the rape of Bad King. It really, so it goes from a compliant, somewhat docile population who just wants to stay out of the fray to now enormous aggressiveness that is going to, hurt a lot of people and themselves in the process. The consequence of it all is unimaginable. We then get the atomic bomb and use it to shorten the war. I think it's important for people to know that in today's conflict with Iran, we're talking about how much they can have of enriched uranium, and they're to get to nuclear bomb level, you need to get an enrichment of over 90%. They probably have it at somewhere around 60%. The atomic bomb was down around 4%. So right now, Iran has enough materials to create another atomic bomb.
This is the only footage ever taken of this atomic explosion. Scant documentation of an event that changes the course of history. Within moments, the mushroom cloud is 10 miles high. It spreads 3 miles over the city, and it's more than 350,000 inhabitants. On the day of the attack, the United States has been in the war for 4 years and has lost over 100,000 men on the Pacific Front alone. Despite losing over 1 million men, the Japanese continue to fight fiercely. Some fear that if the war goes on, millions more will be lost on both sides.
We thus saw the atomic bomb as a potential way to shock them into surrendering.
This radically new bomb reduces the living, breathing downtown of Hiroshima to a wasteland. 70,000 human beings are dead instantly. Another 70,000 injured. It's the highest death toll ever caused by a single weapon. Yet Japan continues to fight. 3 days later, on August 9th, the United States drops a second atomic bomb, this time on the city of Nagasaki. Another 40,000 die. Japan formally surrenders 3 weeks later. The world's bloodiest war is finally over.
The Americans, when they think about Hiroshima, for them the narrative stops as the mushroom cloud erupts and the Enola Gay comes back home. And for the Japanese, that's exactly the moment at which the narrative begins.
Just weeks after Japan's surrender, President Truman orders a report on the physical and medical damage inflicted by this new weapon. Hundreds of scientists, engineers, and military personnel are recruited for the job. Alongside occupation forces, special investigative teams arrive in Hiroshima. Working with Japanese scientists, they'll spend 10 weeks amidst the ruins, gathering intelligence. To comprehend the bomb's devastating power, the analysts break down the 3 major effects of the atomic explosion. Upon detonation, an explosion of energy is released into a small volume of air. This creates a searing white-hot fireball that flashes hotter than the surface of the sun. Gamma rays and neutrons from the breakup of uranium shoot outward as deadly, invisible radiation. As the fireball stops expanding, a wall of pressure, or blast wave, races out at more than 700 miles per hour. In their report, the scientists describe the effects of the first stage of the explosion, a thermal flash.
The flash, the explosion, emitted radiant heat, traveling at the speed of light.
It generates temperatures up to 7,200 degrees Fahrenheit, twice the melting point of steel. Because there's so little film footage of the explosion in Hiroshima, scientists look to atomic tests to help them measure the intensity of the heat.
When the weapon detonates, an enormous amount of energy is released in a very short period of time. And a very large amount of the energy is released simply in the form of light and heat. The temperatures get extremely high, perhaps tens of millions of degrees. It's as if somebody could reach down into the center of the sun and place it in the atmosphere and let it release its energy.
This energy is instantly lethal when released upon human beings.
If your skin gets illuminated, it will simply be turned into carbon. And in the case of people who were close enough to get that much light and heat on their bodies, they simply cease to exist as living entities without them probably even being aware that anything had happened.
It's impossible to know exactly how many citizens are turned into simple piles of carbon during those first few seconds. The U.S. military maps the casualties. Within a radius of 800 feet from ground zero, almost no one survives. Some exposed directly to the rays of the fireball seem to vanish completely. What remains are now called atomic shadows. These imprints of both people and objects can be found all over Hiroshima. The military analysts who witnessed the enormous scale and chilling effects of atomic weapons close their report with a grim observation.
There is no more forceful argument for peace than the sight of the devastation of Hiroshima.
These weapons, they are so indiscriminate, they are so murderous, you have to ultimately conclude that these are weapons of mass genocide.
By the mid-1950s, the U.S. military was in a global nuclear arms race with the Soviet Union and was testing nuclear weapons up to 1,000 times more powerful than those used on Japan.
We're balanced on a knife edge. And until we get rid of all the nuclear weapons in the world and keep it that way, we're always going to be balanced on that. In fact, even without nuclear weapons, we're always going to be balanced on the knife edge because we know how to make them.
Today, it's difficult to see evidence of the once devastated Hiroshima. The museums and monuments of Peace Park are a reminder of what happened on August 6, 1945. Inside this mound are the remains of thousands, bodies not recognizable and never claimed. But the most powerful reminders come from those who survived, the only ones who can tell us what it's like to live through an atomic attack.
Only one bomb changed the whole thing. We have to learn. We cannot make the same mistake. No.
The greatest way to avenge your enemy by learning to forgive. I hope I'm able to give my children a better world than I received. By telling the story, the lessons that we have learned. So that's my desire.
A Japanese general in 1922, who's laying on his deathbed, points to a world map declaring that all of this must become Japan's, indicating territory stretching from Siberia to New Zealand. Yet in making such declarations, Japanese imperialists felt they were merely learning from their Western counterparts. One of the generals was brought up on war crimes in Tokyo in 1946. And he says, "Haven't you ever heard of Perry?" Referring to the U.S. Commodore Matthew C. Perry, who had forced Japan open in 1958. Japan took your country as its teacher and set about learning how to be aggressive. You might say, we became your disciples. Okay. We can open up for...
Please use the raise your hand function and ask a short, succinct question. Oops. And so Sal, do you think it was inevitable that Japan would have came out, or when do you think it would have happened if Perry wasn't there?
Oh, who knows? You'd have to think that, when there's technological change such as the Industrial Revolution or the AI revolution that we're about to experience, that it will impact every living organism on the planet. And so I would suspect that in one way or another, Japan would have had to alter its position of isolation. But that's pure speculation. Yeah. And the aggressions of the industrialist were not going to go away. They would have kept going. And that meant, look, one of the reasons we have diseases like COVID and the others is because we've gone into every nook and cranny on the planet looking for stuff that we can exploit. So, I don't know how they would have escaped that.
And Lewis.
Hey, Sal, good. Thank you very much. Would you spend a little more time talking about how fascism did grow in China? You noted that with the military started again this way, but the Japanese were very enamored of Britain, as I recall, and copying. Did they copy their? When did they start copying the country and their government and fashions, and of course start driving the other side of the road? But if you would comment on the rise of fascism, and if you can see some comparisons to what's happening here, I'd appreciate it.
I'll do my best. I think that they were more enamored of America than Britain, and in terms of wanting to copy America and not necessarily copying Britain. But what you have is we had all this tension that had built up in the scramble for Africa, and it eventually erupts into World War. And when that happens, you have people who want a strong man in power. They want someone who they think can defeat whoever's going to attack them. So you see these people like Mussolini and Stalin and others who, come on as the strong man. It's not because of an astute political campaign. It's not about, I want to have a more peaceful union. I want people to have better housing and healthcare. It's all about muscle. And when you consider where we were at the end of World War I and at the end of World War I and World War II, World War I, we wanted to be isolationist after that. We didn't want to get involved in anything else. Then the other alternative after World War II is we have got to be the biggest and the baddest on the street. Muscle, muscle, muscle. And so you kind of get a conflict that I see between governments that are not looking to be aggressive with their people or with other countries, but instead are existing to create a better life for their people, versus the government that is all about muscle. If you take, why did people support Stalin? When you take the ideas of communism, it's all about really building a better place for the people. I mean, that's not to promote communism. It's just, that's when you listen to the words, whether it comes to being or not, those are the words, right? So it's more of a soft world. It is, let's, feed everybody, house everybody, give healthcare to everybody. That's it. Now you got a guy like Stalin who cares nothing about that. He just as soon killed 10 million people to retain power and to retain Russia's muscle. And so that's what happens. The Japanese now have been humiliated by America, and they look to Europe for how do we become westernized, and what do they get as a model? The Europeans are all fighting each other to take over Africa, building up armies, all of that. So they are emulating really the West, and they pick up the disease. So I think the reason that the strong men come to power, and it is a landscape of people who have experienced warfare, and they're afraid of more warfare, and they are willing to get behind or follow or acquiesce to what they perceive as the strong man. And I think I have this right, is that the 100 Years' War, they've had 80 Years' War, 30 Years' War, I think it was the 100 Years' War that finally comes to an end with the Treaty of Vienna in 1814, on or about there. And there's a long period of peace. No one's attacking each other. No big wars happening. But then we get to the middle of the 19th century, and we now have the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution took place about 100 years before, but it takes that long for it to gain a footing and a presence. So now, by the middle of the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution is roaring. And what does industry need? Raw materials. And so all these people are fighting they're now getting aggressive again, so they can get their hands on those resources to feed into their machines and become extraordinarily wealthy. And so Japan's looking at that, and they're kind of, what's the alternative? Is there another model to follow? There really isn't. So they get pushed into that, and they embrace it. Yeah. I don't know, does that answer that?
Lewis, you're muted. Lewis, you're muted.
Lewis, you're muted.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
There you go.
Yeah, that was good. This leads to what I've been thinking now with your discussion, like the Vienna finally peace in the 1840s. The comparison of after World War I and after comparison with after World War II, how the ends where the Germany and the other countries were really squeezed so badly with the treaty in World War I, versus our plan with the building up of the German, Italy, and Japan. It's a fantastic comparison too. Yeah, that was good. Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the things to look between World War I and World War II is that we often look at things in the immediate. This happens, and then the next month something else happens, and to look at it in a more broader sense. They're still recovering from World War I. By 1935, France is nowhere near recovered. I mean, the reason the Germans could roll over France is France was decimated in World War I and was never able to rebuild its military. So they couldn't fight with anything. When what's his name from England goes and appeases Hitler, Chamberlain, the great Chamberlain appeasement, what was his alternative? He didn't have an army to attack. They hadn't recovered from World War One. The reason the Germans had rebuilt really is because American bankers and lawyers securitized German debt. And so we essentially provided the capital for Germany to rebuild its army. And they're angrier than hell. And Helmut Schacht, the banker, he really seduced America into wanting to support them. And when Hitler was using the money to rebuild the military, Schacht has a falling out with Hitler. He doesn't want the money going in armaments. He wants it going into rebuilding Germany.
Right.
Schacht winds up in Auschwitz. But again, it's when you look at who had what and how did they get these resources to be able to jump back into the fight. They didn't resolve anything at World War One. It was time out. Let's go get a drink of water. I'll meet you back on the battlefield in 30 years or whatever it was. It's tragic.
It was very fortunate that we had the people in office that had made the decision after World War II to just go the other way, and then probably to oversee and make sure it wasn't military that was being built back up.
Look,
until the Russians showed their hand, of course.
Well, the book I recommend strongly is Tony Judt, Judt, The Post-War. He's a professor from NYU, and he's really focused on Europe, post-war Europe, and what changes there.
Yeah, I'd like
because
that.
The change is enormous. Italy changes its laws that now allows abortion, right? In the home of the Vatican, women said, we're done with that. We're done with that, And when you looked at it from a pure political standpoint, you'd say at the end of World War II, it would have been reasonable to project that the communists would have taken power throughout Europe. But it's not the communists, it's the Social Democrats, which is really not ideological. The Social Democrats we need to build places for people to live, shelter, because we don't have any. We're all in rubble. We need to clean this up. We need to take care of the people who are wounded and sick and dying. We have to, try to get our people fed. I mean, that's really what, and this isn't ideological. This is purely pragmatic. And so the Social Democrats have a long ride of power. I mean, if you look at the Scandinavian countries today, they are Social Democrats. I mean, there's some variations here and there, right? And there are other political factions. But for all intents and purposes, it was, we don't want to hear about ideology. So it took that catastrophic event. I like to compare it to an alcoholic. An alcoholic doesn't get better till they hit bottom. And if they hit the bottom and it's really bad enough and they can survive it and grow out of it, they can be redeemed and have a good life. But if they never do, it's a horrible existence. Well, Europe hit bottom, and I think what I derive from Tony Jutt's book is Europe said, we don't want to hear about ideology. We want to build a place where living is living, not dying. Yeah.
Does he also cover Japan and what took place? Was that still the Marshall Plan in Japan?
I believe so. Yes. 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 Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Lauren?
I'm going to jump ahead in time. And first of all, since I came in late, I wanted to make sure that I really understood you.
Whoa,
You
whoa,
said,
wait a minute. You're not here.
I know I'm not here.
So,
But
turn her camera off.
mentally,
She's off in the woods
probably
someplace.
Go ahead.
So I thought I heard you say that Iran has more than enough material to make an atomic bomb already.
Several.
And what would they need to complete that process? Not much.
Not much.
Okay.
They got the material. You see, the tough part is having the material.
Put it
Then,
on a drone and
then
fly
it
it
is
away.
getting it into something that can deliver it. So if you're going to deliver one that would be like Hiroshima, it would require a fair-sized plane to carry it and drop it. It wouldn't be a drone, but could be delivered. Do they have the ballistics to launch it? I don't think so. But then again, keep having a fallout with Canada. And what if Canada says, hey, Iran, we're being abused by America the same as you are. Why don't you come here and launch it?
Mm-hmm.
Is that possible?
Well, and to that point, I just heard this morning, because I didn't really understand this before, that during the JCPOA that Obama put into place,
right,
that the nuclear material that they had that was enriched enough was apparently being held by Russia.
Almost at noon.
And that they could
This is
take care of James there. And that is a possibility again for this arrangement, which means somebody's toast, like Ukraine could be gone, or I don't know. What do you feel like are the ramifications of all of this?
Well, it's when we look back at events that happen and we kind of think things will work out like that again, but we fail to recognize that it could have gone in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
Just as Russia was on the side of Germany at the beginning of World War II, and then Germany betrayed them, and then they switched over to be a part of the Allies. Well, what if Germany didn't betray them and they stayed connected? That would have been a real problem.
Now, I think that King George kind of alluded to that this week.
It could have happened. And when I say, what if things get worse with Canada and the U.S. and Iran decides to see if they can't link up with Canada? Well, that might be unimaginable. Well, it's not unimaginable to me. I mean, and there's other avenues that, they can still use. Look, we're now making enemies across the planet.
I heard it described as superpower suicide.
Yeah, that's what I would call it. Right. Look, one of the things that I liked doing in my career was analyzing vulnerability and seeing how people could attack us and what they would do and all of that kind of stuff. This would be today. It's like a dream come true if you're an analyst looking for how to attack America. There's so many avenues.
The possibilities are endless.
We fired the people who know stuff. We fired them.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it's okay. I've said enough.
Okay.
So, yeah, okay. I guess you answered my question in a roundabout way by saying that it really could hit the fan.
Yes.
Okay.
And when they showed the white light and how people would die instantly and probably wouldn't know it, that's the atomic bomb. If we're looking at a nuclear bomb, that's it. There will be, if a nuclear bomb hits Atlanta, there will be one bright light. We won't see it.
On that happy note, what we doing next week?
Next week we're going to look at India and what happens there. And then I plan to get to where we'll talk about the Nuremberg trials and the Americans' culpability in the Hitler regime. Yeah. Bob Goggins, do you have something?
I don't right now.
Okay.
But thanks for asking.
Okay.
Except that I did want to add before that if we had waited a few months before dropping the bombs, the Japanese Navy there was nothing left to it. It was worse than the Iranian Navy is today. And in like manner, there was nothing left to the Air Force. We could have effectively blockaded them because don't forget, Russia was on the other side over there, trying to move in. And I think it's entirely possible that within a couple of months, they would have surrendered, and we would not have had to incinerate almost 200,000 people.
That, as you know, is an argument that's been going on since the end of World War II, and I don't know the answer to it. I think, but I do think that the with a military force, it is so inculcated into the individual that you'll fight to the death. That's a very powerful control. And what often happens is, and you think even in the ugliest of wars, you'd want to finally give up. In the ugliest of wars, you're more and more angered by the people who you've lost and how you want revenge for them. and you get this notion that, they may kill me, but I'm going to take 2 or 3 with me. It's that kind of thinking. The emperor in Japan, after Nagasaki, said he had to make a national address, and he said, we have to accept the unacceptable. And because the idea of surrender was unacceptable, he says, we now have to. And as the deity, as the kind of leader, he had that power and had an effect on the Japanese people that they did in fact surrender. But I don't know. There's people would say we could have dropped a bomb as an example on an uninhabited island.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been another way to do it, but very difficult decisions. Yeah.
Sal, for next week, did you send out some information on reading and so forth, or do you have a couple of recommendations?
Well, you should have it in the initial papers that I sent out. If you don't, send me a message and I'll send it to you again. But
Super,
yeah,
thank you.
There's a couple of books on India that I think are very important, in that the British roll over them. The East India Company was merely a disguise. They're a military force, and what's done there is pretty obnoxious. So so we'll take a look at what goes on there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything? If not, please give Sal one applause for this unhappy story.
Right. Thanks, Sal.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Sal.
everybody. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for
A
coming.
day in the life of Sal Depasquale.
Yeah.
Thank you.